I think first of all, Valorant is unique in the sense that it's an esport that started during COVID. So it's an esport that started where the majority of the fans were isolated, watching these tournaments while being alone. So I think that watch parties became a very natural way of feeling like you're watching it together with someone because not a lot of people had someone to watch them with. Like because if you go back to like the early days of Counter Strike tournaments and LANs, people actually just went to the tournaments and watched them live, or you went over to a friend's place and you watched the tournament on the TV or on the PC together. Um, but almost for the first 2 years of Valorant tournaments, they were all online and they were all hosted while people were in isolation. So I do think that that kind of sparked a bigger interest for co-streaming, specifically for that game to kind of cater to the fact that the audience was in a unique situation.
Jonas, how are you doing?
I am good. Thank you for asking.
Good, good. You when we got in touch last week, you were flying back from the States to Norway. What's the occasion? I know you're from Norway, but why are you back home?
So there's a bunch of things, but I was nominated for an award show, Streamer of the Year in Norway, and I have some things to do at the embassy with some
Mm.
interesting and lovely visa things, and there's also like a few other smaller things like interviews and stuff, and I got offered a streaming setup in Oslo, so I was able to basically fly home and see some old friends and still be able to do my job. The only problem was that I had an event at Riot Games on Friday and the award show was in Norway on Saturday. So I had to go from event to the airport, fly 15 hours, and then go straight to the next event from the airport. So that was interesting.
Yeah, such is the life, right? You're I think part of the reason we wanted to have you on the show when we were talking through it is like kind of you've had this like really fun to watch rise as a content creator over the past like it's been a little bit more than a year, but you've been doing this for a while. I would say the past year has kind of catapulted. You've been quite successful with a lot of the work that you're doing. I know you posted a few days ago some of the watch hour statistics from your YouTube channel as well, which is like always, I mean, as somebody that does YouTube content, it's always exciting to see. And then you won the award for Streamer of the Year from a Norwegian award show. What coming off of that, kind of how do you feel about what the past year's entailed for yourself?
The past year has been crazy because it was the year I moved to America. So I like it started off sitting in a mountain cabin in a village with 6,000 inhabitants, going skiing in the morning, streaming in the evening while waiting for my work visa to get confirmed. And then once that visa got confirmed, I basically booked a one-way ticket to Los Angeles and just started a new life there. And it's been super crazy. I've made a lot of friends there already before coming, so it's really weird how you move to a new country and it feels more like home than the country you came from. It's kind of strange.
It's convenient to be in LA though, like where so many different people are in your industry. Obviously, you're a
Yeah.
part of Team Liquid, and they have a pretty huge facility there in Los Angeles. But I was checking out the stream that you did this past week with Avali and some of the other folks from the league scene as well, and yeah, it's nice when like everybody's kind of all in one space, right? She was on the show a few weeks ago. She's a good friend, Avali. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I mean, LA is definitely the mecca for content creation and streaming in general. It's super easy to like get things going. Like one of the things I missed before was the ability to just like message someone and say like, do you want to stream together, do a collab, or do you want to go have food and like because we have dinners a lot nowadays, but we talk about work and streaming too, so we kind of like inspire each other. So like every time we go have food, it's like a mini workshop. Uh, which
Yeah.
is and when I lived in Norway, I felt like all of my friends were doing all these things, but I was like sitting on, that meme with like SpongeBob where the guy's like in the window staring down at the friends hanging out.
Yes.
That was kind of me. But now it's much better, and I recently also started making like a small group of like a little climbing group. So we go rock climbing a few times a week and have lunch after. So we also touch some grass to kind of break off from just being in the studio all day long.
Yeah, it's I understand that. I got back into the gym this past week, joined a new gym, so it's crazy how like the mental how much it affects your mental health too when you're doing exercise and like being active, right? Like I've found it even in the past week immensely helpful to me. So I
Yeah.
completely understand. Um, but it's I'm struggling to figure out where to start here because I actually think that in addition, one of my personal interests in your career is your music, and your music career. I don't know if you know this, but we're both former choir boys, and
Oh, there you
I've talked
go.
about this maybe a little bit on the show. So I was growing up, I was a part of the Atlanta Boy Choir, which was pretty like world known. The year before I joined, they went to Italy and toured and sang for the Pope, which was pretty impressive. And then the year I joined, we went to Alaska and toured as well. And a few years after I had like moved on in life, they were a part of the Peggy Carter scene, funeral scene in the Captain American Civil War, which like is awesome. Like they had like a
That's
choir
cool.
singing
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
film,
yeah.
and
That's
Marvel does a
cool.
ton of filming in Atlanta, so it was like convenient timing. So yeah, it's yeah. Talk to me a little bit about your music and your history in music and like how that inspires some of the content that you do now.
So way back, my dad is a musician, so I grew up with
Mm.
music from the very get go. He taught me how to play guitar, taught me how to play piano, or get musical sense in general. And then in my teenage years, I played a lot of rock and pop. And like we had multiple different bands. I was playing bass guitar in one band, singing in one band, and stuff. And then my early 20s, I started singing in a choir and taking classical voice lessons. So I actually didn't start with like opera before I was like 21, 22. But it really like kicked off something in me, and I started working a lot to get better at it. And I started my YouTube channel almost at the same time, and I started making like a cappella music covers in the very beginning. Because coming from a choir, I was always used to like harmonies and well, I had a lot of voices in my head in a good way. So I was making all these harmonies, and I realized that I had the ability to record them and kind of like split them apart. Like when I heard a song, I was able to like split it up in 8, 10, or 12 different parts. And I just started like recording them to feel sane. And yeah, so that was like the start of it. And eventually I got like accepted to uh, classical music conservatory in Norway. So I started, training as a performance singer. And then I started doing musicals and operas. And before you knew it, I had like 400 live shows in my backpack. And I was also touring around the world on a luxury cruise ship doing musicals and operas. So yeah, it
How
was
do you
fun.
think about integrating music into your content now? Because, and when I'm asking that, I'm thinking back to like probably 3 or 4 months ago, we had Alpharad on the show, and Alpharad is something that he did outside of his gaming content, which is historically around Super Smash Brothers. Like he developed an album a couple of years ago and like went and did like a full studio production, and he had a lot of different thoughts on it. But I'm curious how you think about integrating that into what you do now further, especially because a lot of I think the content you've become known for the past year is around Valorant, which I mean, there's not a ton of overlap. So I'm curious, like, to get inside your creative brain a little bit and how
um,
you're thinking about those things.
so some of the first thing I did back from a few years ago, which kind of started this, was I was making parody songs for Counter Strike. I would make a lot of these Counter Strike songs that became quite popular. Some of them are like close to like a million plays on YouTube and stuff. And when Valorant came out, I started doing the same. I started to make a few like parody songs on the different characters and the different playstyles and stuff. And I started like having a guitar nearby, so occasionally I would do a few songs while streaming. And now I actually have a daily sub goal of 100, and if I hit 100, I do a mini concert. And the reason why I'm doing this is two things. First of all, it's like an incentive for subscriptions because it's a monetization structure. And second of all, it's like a daily reminder that I am more than just a gamer. I am also a musician on a fairly high level, and that if people, because like I sometimes I feel like I want to sing a lot, and I will just straight up do a short music stream or like an hour here and there, or I invite friends over and we do like collabs together. I've recently been like singing a lot with some friends who are also great singers, and it's so much fun to do it. And I've noticed that like the viewership retains much better than before, which is because over time you have like a strategy to build towards variety, so that regardless of what you do, you want to
Yep.
keep people interested in you as a person and not just like the game you play, which is something that's been my entire branding strategy for like almost 3 years now. But this new daily incentive thing has been working really well, because then sometimes you hit 100 subs during one stream, and then everybody's like, oh yes, we get a mini concert,
To get
something
a
to be
song.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when it's like closing in on like 70, 80, then people don't want to leave because they're like, oh, we might miss the concert, right? And then and then afterwards you cut that part out and you put it on your second YouTube channel as like a variety segment for like a singing session, and it creates this like much more unique image than just being a gamer.
Yeah, something you said in that answer really crucially that I think is understood by creators like yourselves and some of the other people that have been on this show, people that are successful on YouTube and Twitch, but maybe not quite understood by like, sort of older entertainment people that have worked in the entertainment industry for a long time. And it's building that personal connection to you where it is really truly and it's weird. I mean, we've talked about this on the show before. It can be parasocial, it can be strange, and we've seen people manipulate that for the bad. We've seen people use that for the good in terms of raising for charity, etc. How do you think about that? Building both a close connection with your audience, but also maintaining that distance to allow yourself to have a life that you can do with off camera and it not be anything odd.
Um, it is definitely a challenge because, like, if you distance yourself too much to your fans, then they don't feel like they're being appreciated. And if you like pull them too close, then it starts to get really weird. But I think every streamer is different, and they all have their own like guidelines for what they kind of like believe in and how they treat their audience. Because you'll notice how every streamer treats their audience very differently.
Yep.
But I have like certain kind of like rules I follow by that kind of protect me and my identity. Like for instance, nobody knows where I live. I usually don't post where I am while I'm there, but I will post it after, things like that. Because sometimes I've noticed that like in my chat, people will be starting like, so how long does it take to get from there to there? You know, like they're starting to fish a little bit, and that kind of
Uh,
like put me in a little
yeah.
bit of an awkward spot. And then sometimes also people get very personal, and then it's my responsibility to tell them that it's not okay. So I will actually call it out because I believe that it truly like teaches my audience to like back off a little bit, because sometimes it can get a little bit too close. So if they get very personal, because they think like sometimes they generally don't know, right? They feel like they know you so well because they watch you a lot, and they start making jokes about things that is like very personal, and then you have to be like, okay, just so you know, like a friend of mine that I know in real life could make this joke, but I'm not comfortable with you making this joke because even though you know me well from watching me a lot, I don't know you that well because you are like sadly one of, well, it's not sadly, but like you are one of many people that watch my content on a daily, and I simply
Yeah.
don't have like the time to be able to like personally follow up every single viewer.
It's a problem exacerbated by streaming, which is something we've talked about on the show a lot in terms of, basically streaming because you're live, you're right there, right?
Yeah,
The amount of connection and distance between you and audience is really really short, and also they do spend so much time with you. I mean, if you're streaming 5 hours, 8 hours a day, whatever it may be, depending on who you are and what your schedule is like, they're getting so much access to you and they're getting
yeah.
it in real time, in a way that YouTube's not that way, even though it is personal in nature, depending on the type of content you're watching. But it's different with streaming, and it's something that I think like I've thought about a lot critically on Twitch in general.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely like because going through YouTube comments, I think you'll usually notice that they're less personal. They will usually be things like either like something like very simple as hate or something, or a typical comment is like using a certain time code and commenting on a specific thing that happened in your video. But it's very rare that there's a comment on YouTube that exceeds what I would consider like the parasocial limits. But on Twitch, I mean, there's a reason why you need a bunch of moderators on Twitch, because there's a lot of weirdos out there, and some of them mean well. They generally just don't know. And that's
Yep.
where it's like your job as a streamer to realize who are the people that genuinely like are trying to like create a more negative space in your stream, and who are the people who just needs a little education. Because that's okay, you know, it's okay to be clueless and but willing to learn. So if you tell them in a nice way, they'll be like, okay, I get it now. That makes sense. Like a very common one is like every streamer has probably heard you look tired. And then there's always a huge discussion where there's like, but I just care about you. I want you to rest enough and stuff. And then it's
Mm,
like, yes, but And that's usually sparks a whole debate, because in one sense, yes, you're right, like, you want them to sleep enough, you want them to take care of their own health, and that's great. But I usually compare it to, like, imagine, like, if you're standing in line at the grocery store and the person in front of you looks tired, do you walk up to them and say, you look tired? I'm sure that will go great, right? But it's this, like, assumption that they know you well, and it's a mutual relationship, but it's very one-sided. And that's why sometimes you have to tell them that, sorry, but you shouldn't, like, comment on a streamer's appearance, because it might hurt them, even though you have good intentions. Because sometimes it's not about the intentions, but it's like how you perceive it as the streamer on the other end.
Yeah, and I think those boundaries are really important. I admire that you pointed out too, because I think that that's really important, because it's easy not to, right? Like, especially if you have sponsor fulfillments or whatever it may be, right? Like, and people take your word, they trust your word as an entertainer, a personal entertainer. They take your word very seriously, right? So it's easy to just not say anything, and like, let that, let the fan monetize against them, whatever it may be, right? It's a really, really tricky balance. So appreciate you talking about that too. I want to talk a little bit about the growth that we were talking about earlier, and the rise of your career the past year. I am fascinated by Valorant more generally, and sort of the role that you've played in that, the community that you've built around it, the work that you've done in it too. And I have some questions both about yourself and about the game and the community that's built around it, more broadly too. So I think, I spent my weekend, part of my weekend, watching VCT lock in, which was really exciting. I have kept up with Valorant the past 3 years. I think I casted technically its first tournament, which was an invitational that ESPN hosted. And so it's come a long way from when we were putting together that event. And it's what's really interesting to me about Valorant is co-streaming. Something I know that you've done in the past. Something I know that recently you weren't on the walk-in co-streaming list, but then a lot of people lobbied for you to be. And I want to talk about how co-streaming is changing esports a little bit, because it is. I looked at the various different VCT numbers this past weekend. Tarek, Shroud, others who were co-streaming the event. Um, Numbers are massive in a way that I think many esports titles, even League of Legends, the biggest among them, is not on a regular cadence. How do you think co-streaming has impacted the viewer experience more broadly for esports, and specifically for Valorant?
I think, first of all, Valorant is unique in the sense that it's an esport that started during COVID. So it's an esport that started where the majority of the fans were isolated, watching these tournaments while being alone. So I think that watch parties became a very natural way of feeling like you're watching it together with someone, because not a lot of people had someone to watch them with. Like, because if you go back to, like, the early days of Counter-Strike tournaments and LANs, people actually just went to the tournaments and watched them live. Or you went over to a friend's place and you watched the tournament on the TV or on the PC together. Um, but almost for the first 2 years of Valorant tournaments, they were all online, and they were all hosted while people were in isolation. So I do think that that kind of sparked a bigger interest for co-streaming, specifically for that game, to kind of cater to the fact that the audience was in a unique situation. I also think that, including myself, a lot of creators kind of blew up during Valorant's rise, and they all had viewership that was kind of like competing with Valorant, right? So if we were streaming at the same
Mm.
time as Valorant, it would kind of hurt both of our viewerships, because we're stealing from the same quote unquote group of viewers. So then, by starting to add watch party hosts, I feel like they could kind of, because they can still see then, like, for instance, if you see every time they talk about how many people watch their tournament, they always include the numbers from the watch party hosts,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yep.
kind of interesting, right? Because we all know that if there was no watch parties, then those numbers would be lower in total. Which means that, because there was also rules about showing the same sponsors, you're not supposed to hide any logos, so that the sponsors, so when you, like, sell the product, you can technically also sell the viewership numbers from the co-streams, right? Because the
Yep.
sponsors are shown on them as well. So I think that's one of the huge things. And then what was a big problem to start was that there was only watch parties for American tournaments, there was a huge problem with getting watch party access in Europe, which is something I was fighting for a long time, due to many different languages and broadcasting rules. So I had to be in meetings with some of the higher uppers in Riot that were like the esports staff, and I had to be in meeting with broadcast producers from like the Spanish region, Russian, Turkish, and I was kind of just being. I was kind of just being a bit of a bitch. I was like constantly trying to like complain enough to people would realize that like, look at how big the numbers are in America. Why can't we do this in Europe, you know? And then finally we started to make a move, and then I was appointed as like the first co-streamer in Europe, and it was like a test for a while. I had full monopoly on co-streams for a few weeks, which was, you know, that was fun, but obviously that wasn't like the end game. And then eventually it started to grow to a bigger audience, and now it's so cool to see that we have like large profiles in every region doing co-streams regularly.
I'd love you to speculate a little bit because I don't know if there's data to show this, but I'd love you to speculate a little bit on how having access to that content when you do, being able to co-stream, not just yourself, but broadly more everybody else as well that does watch parties and co-streams. I'd love you to speculate a little bit on what the value add is there. Like, do you think, hypothetically, if someone like Shroud or Tarek were to go live at the same time as a VCT event, do you think that their viewership is less or more because they have the access, the ability to co-stream it, versus if they
I
were doing something else?
I think their viewership is definitely higher when they do a watch party, because most of these large streamers, they already have their audience, and their audience like they are their favorite streamer. So people are always going to watch their favorite streamer over anything else. What's different when you're watching a tournament is that you get this huge group of people who are esports fans, and the thing about esports fans is that some of them, they want to watch the game from a certain point of view, either from like a biased side. Like for instance, if I host a Team Liquid watch party, their Team Liquid fans are more likely to, you know, it's pretty
Yeah.
obvious, right? Because you want to be part of the fan club, you feel like you're part of the gang. And then for instance, Sliggy, who's like the old coach for Team Liquid, if he hosts a watch party and you're very interested in analysis, then that's a great way to get analyses that you would only get between the games in VCT, because the casters are busy actually casting the match, right? Which is completely fair. They can't do everything at
Yep.
once. So I think that the biggest value of co-streams is that you basically have a lots of different types of watch parties that all cater to a certain specific type of viewer. So that if you want to, like for instance, if someone wants to like watch a party with me and watch my streams, then they're probably more likely to learn something about Sova than watching another stream, right? Because I'm
Right.
definitely gonna complain if someone doesn't like play Sova well in a tournament, right? And Shroud or Tarek with like a lot of background in esports, they're probably gonna complain if there's not a proper crossfire being played or whatever, right? So if you're like looking to learn in a specific way, then I'm sure there's a watch party for you that will like cater to the needs you have.
Yeah, and I think kind of two things following up on that specifically. You know, I've been covering a lot the past year. My background, you know, as a business reporter covering the esports industry at ESPN for 5 years, and I think now that I've been reporting a lot the past year on sort of this decline around a lot of esports and how, you know, investment expectations are not meeting what they were, right? A lot of these franchise leagues like Overwatch League and Call of Duty League and even the LCS and the LEC to a certain extent are not panning out in terms of the revenue and profitability that had been promised. And the viewership is declining in some of these games as well. It is not going so well. And I think Valorant specifically gives me a little bit of hope, specifically for the fact that it is it feels like it's the passion game of a lot of creators. And in a world where creators are the more dominant form of entertainment right now on Twitch and are just every single month growing on YouTube to a degree, right? Like it feels like Valorant will survive because people that don't traditionally have a history with FPS games. People, I'm thinking like Disguised Toast and like Ludwig hosting a tournament a couple months ago or a month ago, right? Like their contribution to the industry getting more people into this game because they like it personally, I think is a net positive, and it makes me a little bit more hopeful that Valorant will kind of be a flag bearer for esports more broadly. I'd love your thoughts on that and how creators are helping contribute growth to the game outside of just co-streaming.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a kind of interesting topic because it also kind of touches on how Riot chooses their watch party hosts. So imagine that Ludwig has, let's say, 20,000 people watching him regardless of what he does because he's a very successful variety streamer, right? Now, if he
Yep.
does a watch party for Valorant, he will pull in a lot of new viewers, which is why that Riot chose to choose a lot of non-endemic streamers to do watch parties. And of course, that gets a lot of backlash because then you're like, oh, what happens to the people that are actually fans of your game and just picking people that get viewership? And I'm like, yeah, but you have to also understand it from Riot's point of view that this is a business. So like, if they want to put more people into the game, then getting big variety streamers like Nihachu and Ludwig and Pokimane and Toast, like if these people watch party, they pull like 10 to 20,000 people into the game that doesn't necessarily watch the game like they would not be watching an esports broadcast in the first place. So that's just added value, and they're not even paying for the co-streams, like they're not even getting
Yep.
paid for it. So it's like, I know sometimes that causes backlash because their favorite streamer didn't get the co-stream access, but it's also from a business point of view, it makes perfect sense, right? So I think that kind of touches on the same thing where like a lot of people follow these huge profiles and they kind of reflect what their opinions are. So, for instance, I'll give an example. There's a vampire battle royale called Blood Hunt, which was super popular a while ago. Shroud was playing it a lot. I was playing it a lot too. We played in a few tournaments together and stuff, and the game was doing great. And then a few big streamers that were kind of carrying the game a bit, including Shroud, didn't play it anymore. They switched to other variety games. And suddenly the game drops from like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40,000 concurrent players on Steam to like sub 1,000. So when like I switch to like variety and play Bloodhunt now, I literally have 85% of the entire category's viewership, right? So that kind of
Mm.
shows how like a few streamers can actually carry a game's popularity to a certain extent, unless it's like a huge AAA
Title.
game
Yep.
company because they already have the promotional power to do this on their own.
Yeah, well, even some of the AAA titles have struggled with this. I think when you were saying that, I thought about like H1Z1 that had this very specific phenomenon. It fell off really hard, and partly because PUBG came out better or
Yeah.
came out and it was a little bit better of a product as well, and it was the real spinoff of the Arma mod that made the genre so popular.
Yeah.
But also, I think about Apex Legends, which
Hmm.
when it launched, it put a ton of money into influencer marketing. I mean, it reportedly paid Ninja $1 million just to do that opening week stream, right? It's sort of his peak of popularity on Twitch as well.
Hmm.
And then it kind of fell off a little bit in between, but it's reinvented itself to be more casual, to more accessible and marketing towards a little bit more casual gamer. And Apex has, like, to my understanding, a pretty healthy player base right now in a way that a lot of other games don't. But I do hear your point too that like streamers can make or break a game. The influence is really really impressive. I think it's also really scary, and that would lead me to my next question. Like, do you think Valorant is kind of long for the haul? Like, do you think it will continue to be kind of the creator obsession that it is now?
I think Valorant is in a pretty healthy spot. I think that one problem some people have, like including something I've been like theorizing a lot about myself, is that you keep comparing viewership from like a year ago to now, for instance. So you'll see how like a lot of us when we played Valorant 1.5 year ago during like when a new hero comes out, agent, sorry, or like if there is like a hype moment or watch party, sometimes we would all be on like 4, 5, 6,000 viewers, right? But the problem is that over time, there's a lot more people playing the game because it becomes more popular. So there's more people to fight over the viewership, and that's kind of funny because like for some viewers, there's like a kind of like expectation that someone fell off if their viewership is lower, right? But on the
Mhm.
contrary, the problem is that first of all, we were all streaming this game while there was full isolation in the entire world. So there was never a better time to have high digital viewership, right? Now people touch grass again. Now people don't watch streams in the weekends because they actually have a life. And these are things that will greatly impact numbers, right? So some people go like, "Oh my god, the game fell off." People come into my chat too and tell me I fell off because I only have 2,000 viewers, and I'm like, "What is wrong with you?" Um, and I know, right? And that's like 2,000 viewers. That's like a lot of people's
It's really
end
good, yeah.
game dream. And I'm also like, but I'm fully aware that like 2,000 viewers now isn't the same as 2,000 viewers 1 year ago because there's so many other factors that play in. And also, the game isn't like on a hype wave anymore. which is a good thing, by the way. It's because it's like stable now. I kind of
Yeah.
compare it to like when you like get in a relationship and then at the very start there's like a honeymoon phase where everything is like crazy volatile and super exciting and like super mood swings, right? And then you get like 2 years down the line and then there's this like casual I love you mode where like everything is just nice, nothing is wrong, but it's not always great either, but it works and it's not leaving. And I think that's the point where I feel like Valorant now is in a very healthy relationship with us, where like sometimes there's a new agent, sometimes there's a new map, and there's a little extra wave of content to ride on, and then there's a new tournament, and then the viewership goes back up, and then more people play it, and it kind of goes up and down, but it never touches a low point that is like too scary in terms of coming back from, which is what I think Apex had for a while, which is why I was also very impressed that it kind of managed to dig itself out of that ditch, because for a long time I think a lot of people thought that like this was the end of Apex, like it couldn't get back from that.
Yeah, yeah. I still love Apex. I found myself going back to it like every like
Yeah,
three to
same.
6 months or so. It's it of the genre, it feels the most movement feels really good. As someone who
Yeah.
played a ton of Call of Duty at a high level a decade ago, it feels not too dissimilar from COD in a lot of ways, like in its movement, and I like that too. Even more than Warzone, which can feel or DMZ, which can feel a little clunky as well. So
Mm.
always impressed by Apex. The next thing I was going to ask about was sort of the impact that you think co-streaming has on broadcast talent, because I think if I've heard anyone be sort of against co-streaming, it is people, professional broadcasters who are on the actual streams. Not all of them, but there are some who are louder than others, who have spoken out publicly about it. And it when so much of the viewership is coming from third parties who again aren't being paid to co-stream these things, you can make the argument, if you're someone like Riot, a tournament organizer, that you don't have to compensate the people that are on the camera as well, or that you don't have to hire the same quality. And for the people in the Twitter space, I am air quoting, because quality and engagement or like relevance or popularity are not always the same. There are people that do sports broadcasting, there are people that do esports broadcasting and cast matches that are, I would consider, better than some of their peers, but not as popular as some of their peers. And so I think there was this rhetoric, has still exists, has been in the past too, that about co-streaming killing sort of what it means to be an esports caster. And as someone yourself, you've been on air as an official broadcaster before in this game, but you've also done the co-streaming stuff. What is your point of view on sort of the impact it has on that career path?
I think I definitely understand what like so I definitely understand the angle from a talent, because like their job is to like provide the best possible performance on a broadcast, and the better the performance, like also they should also be paid competitively. Now, we all know that if you do a coach team, it's very common that as soon as you go to the analyst desk, you switch to daily dose of internet instead, or do like a just chatting segment. So it's very common that a lot of these big watch parties, they don't actually show anything of the analysis. I think for the casting, it doesn't make much difference because that's always shown anyway, right? I think even if
Yep.
you're doing that, like there's very few people who watch party a clean feed. Some do, but most people watch party with the actual caster audio, so that shouldn't have any impact on like how much the caster is seen. But I'm thinking specifically about like the host and analyst
Mm-hmm.
desk, where I could understand that they feel left out um, in some cases because of co-streams. But I also do think that it's kind of just where we have ended up, and that they kind of just have to accept that like the greater good for a game company as a whole doing co-streams will always outweigh uh, that like complaint. And then on the contrary, also, if you can put it this way, you can say that let's say the coach teams add 33% more viewership, then shouldn't that technically mean that they can also pay the analyst desk more money because the game reaches more viewership from the sponsors? That's just like, very theorizing, but if you know what I mean, like there's still a lot of people watching the broadcast, so technically they shouldn't be paid less for it, right?
Yeah. I think it's just the balance of, if co-streams are increasing the viewership, like at some point these games companies want to be profitable with what they're doing. and there certainly are not right now. I can say with like very full certainty that none of the esports leagues gross any significant profit, if at all, if they even break even. And so I think like that, talk about margins. That's what they're trying to get to, right? And ad supported media, it's hard. I mean, sports is like traditional entertainment. Sports is the one thing that people still watch ads against, but esports not so much the same. It is a phenomenon that I don't think anybody's quite figured out. So, but we are going to take some audience questions here shortly. So I want to ask you about goals, Jonas, because I think like you've achieved a lot in the past couple of years, and I I'm always curious when we have content creators on this show to hear what they're thinking about next. Like, where do you go from here? And maybe the short answer is like, I stream today, or I stream tomorrow, or I do you do more like active rock climbing or bouldering content, right? Like that you've been doing more of too. You said you're streaming that tomorrow, but yeah, I'm curious. Like, if you're thinking next 2 to 5 years, like what is the overarching goal? What is something you want to do and change or make better in your content?
So first of all, like I've had one big goal since I started streaming, and that is to be able to stream what I want, when I want, where I want, when I want, with who I want. And but that doesn't come very easily, and it's like I make new steps towards this kind of goal uh, every week. There are a lot of different choices you have to make, and the choices are different depending on what stage you are in streaming, how much of your audience is now a variety audience, and so forth. I think the biggest one for me this year is to try to go back into doing more music content, not necessarily like music videos, but producing live shows and participating, collaborating with other streamers that also do music, and just kind of like put my voice on the map a little bit more. Because I think there's still a lot of people that are not aware that I've done singing for much more than I've done Valorant, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also kind of what makes me stand out. So I think like playing heavily into that is probably something that is smart to do to keep growing. So I think that's kind of like what my next step is going to be. And then also doing more IRL content, like you mentioned. I'm starting off my fourth YouTube channel pretty soon, which is going to be purely IRL content. It's going to be like music covers, cooking streams, maybe podcast and rock climbing, hiking, all these kind of things. Just because I think that's like something that is very important to me. And a lot of my friends, we always already do it together. So, and because we're a bunch of nerds, of course, we're going to monetize whatever we do. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think podcasting, as someone considering we're on one right now, podcasting is like one of the few things I think that this space hasn't quite figured out to any significant degree. Even at the top, I talked to a lot of content creators in the gaming and gaming adjacent spaces who haven't figured out how to make it work. But I think it's like a huge sort of untapped audience segment. So yeah, I'm really intrigued. And in terms of the short term, uh when you go back to the States, or I forgot to ask about this. Are you being added now as a Valorant co-streamer for the watch parties? Can you
Only for
say?
this week. So there's two types of co-streaming like permissions. I would normally get the like full open permission, but there's also one that goes to esports orgs. So since I didn't get the official one this time, we basically got one where like the creators and Liquid share one slot. So then basically I get this week, and then someone else gets the next week, and someone else had the previous week. So
Any
that's
crazy VCT predictions before you co-stream it?
I don't know. I mean, as a completely unbiased streamer as a part of Team Liquid, I think they're going all the way. You know, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm always gonna be rooting for my boys. You know, that's I guess. I don't really have any predictions. I've also honestly been so busy that I haven't even been able to watch all of it. Which like normally it was kind of a cheat code because I was able to stream while watching it. But it's hard to
Got to
keep
do
up with all
both.
the yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard to keep up with all the matches while you're working full time if you're not able to watch by it, which is kind of also a little bit sad. But there are a lot of really talented streamers out there that are currently doing great watch parties. So I understand that it's hard to be able to give permission to everybody, and I'm sure like some other time I'll probably get my turn.
Yeah, I would highly encourage you, if you find yourself time to catch up on the past weekend, I would highly encourage you to go watch the Loud versus Energy set. It was
Yeah.
really fucking good. I watched all three games, like, glued to my screen. It was really exciting. I mean, that matchup's fun anyway, but yeah, it
Yeah.
was this past weekend was a good set. So, um, I think we're gonna start taking some audience questions here since we're in the back half. So this question is from, I'm gonna butcher this name, I'm sorry, Axelwalt, which is, what is the worst experience Jonas has ever had? I don't know if that's in the context of streaming. They did not specify.
Worst experience I've ever had. I'm gonna assume it's like in terms of streaming, but outside streaming, I've had a few near-death experiences that haven't been great. But like car accidents and like bicycling and ending up through the front window of a car and stuff. We've
Wait,
had
what
a
the
few.
hell? Explain this. Explain this. I didn't see this. Please.
This was like I don't know, it's like 5 years ago maybe, where I was bicycling on like one of those racing bikes, like they go pretty fast.
Yeah.
And there was a car that was like coming out of a driveway and they didn't check their right, and I just like smashed right into the front right side of the car, and I broke the window with my elbow, and I hit the roof with my head, and I actually elbowed the passenger in the front seat, so he got knocked out and had to be sent to the hospital. And I actually didn't have any injury, so the car was
You're
actually more
superhuman.
the car was actually more damaged than me. I had like I was not bleeding. I had like a small like tear in my jacket, and the person inside the car had like all the glass in his face, and he was knocked out because of like getting my elbow there. But that's like, it was fairly scary because I ended up like, I was bicycling and suddenly I was like inside a car. So it was definitely a suboptimal experience. But yeah.
If I had any doubts before, you've now convinced me that all people from Northern Europe are superhuman, because like you didn't sustain any injuries, and you went through a car window with your elbow, and like you weren't even concussed, like you banged your
No,
head on
there
a.
was actually, the funny thing is like the side of the door was shaped after my hip because like I hit like the
Oh
soft
my
side of the
god.
door. So like you can like see like a human print on on the side of the car afterwards.
This is a fun body shop story. The driver takes it into the body shop to get it repaired. It's like, what'd you hit? Like a deer? Like
Yeah, it
I
was a deer. Uh
and now I'm laughing too, because I like saw this past weekend too, like somebody driving in Australia in the middle of the night, and they had a dash cam, and a kangaroo like leapt from like 5 feet and like went through the windshield mirror, and I was like,
Oh my
Jesus
god.
Christ, man! I'm from like the the southeastern part of the United States. I've hit a deer before, never a
Hmm.
fucking kangaroo. Jesus Christ!
Yeah.
Just like,
Oh, those are scary.
Prime, do we have the next audience question?
I have a question. So, how has your streaming experience been since moving to North America? And how has it changed?
Oh, good question. I think the two biggest things that have changed for me, actually three, is first of all, I can be extremely social without it affecting my work because like all my friends live nearby. Uh, Two, I don't have to stay up till 5 a.m. to do collaborations with other streamers because we're in the same time zone. And three, now that American viewers are my main audience, I get about 3 times as high salaries from sponsors. That's probably like yeah, the three main things that I can think of. Other than the fact that I was like probably 6 years old when I told my mom I wanted to move to California, so it's kind of like a full circle, also, to be honest.
Was that a supported decision to move to the States, or
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
that's good.
honestly, they can't really stop me anyway, so they just kind of just I've always just gone off on my own, and then they were like, "Well, here he goes again. We just gotta support it. He's a lunatic, so just nothing's gonna. If I want something, I won't stop. That's kind of been like a reoccurring theme in the movie that is my life.
Yeah, that's I feel that too, as somebody who moved around a lot very young. So I got the ESPN job at 19 and had to move. I had already moved to Texas once and then moved up to Connecticut, so I did a bunch of years there. But yeah. I think Prime, also producer, had one last question, so we'll end on this one. Thank you again for everybody for being here. Prime, go ahead.
Didn't really know too much about you until a few weeks ago when I started seeing your name more with Valorant stuff. And when I asked a friend, he immediately was just like, oh, Jonas used to queue a lot with Seagull back in the day. How has been your transition from doing a lot of Overwatch content and moving into kind of the Riot ecosystem and Valorant and everything like that?
Well, I mean, so I played Overwatch in the very beginning, as in like 2015, 2016 era. I was playing for the Norwegian national team for a while, competed in the World Cup, played in a few semi-pro teams and stuff, but I stopped completely and I went on a cruise ship and sang opera all around the world. So I took like a huge break. So when I came back and started streaming, I was actually going full-time Valorant. So in a way, it's actually been the transition from Valorant to Overwatch in the later, like this year and end of last year, has been kind of interesting because having been a full-time Valorant creator for about 2 years and then Overwatch 2 coming out, I kind of managed to reconnect with a lot of my old friends from Overwatch, which has been really cool. And obviously, Overwatch is a super good variety game for someone who plays Valorant because there's a lot of shared audience there. And especially because Valorant came out at a time where Valorant came out at a time when Overwatch really sucked. So a lot of people that usually were hardcore Overwatch fans, they probably also play Valorant. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me, and I was really happy to like reconnect with like Seagull, and I got introduced to Emong and Flats and Karq and this whole bunch, and we play a lot of 5 stacks together, and it's been super nice. And we keep farming drops together, we raid each other. It's been a really good time, and I think we've all like benefited greatly from the collaborations and the friendship so far. And it's just feels really nice to be able to stream more than one game. So if you're having a bad day or like you're losing a few ranked games and it doesn't feel right, then instead of stopping your stream, you can switch to another game, and then at least it takes a few more hours before you feel miserable in that game too.
Do you think that Overwatch 2 will grow to be successful? I mean, it had its early pop when the multiplayer version came out a couple of months ago, but and it's had like some decent. I was doing some YouTube analytics the other day. It's had some like decent engagement on YouTube in particular, but it's certainly not exactly where it was a couple of months ago on Twitch. Do you think that Overwatch 2 will be long-term successful?
I hope so. That is my best answer. They have been through a lot, and for a lot of people, it's a lot better than what it's been in the previous years, at least. Blizzard does listen a lot. It's just that sometimes the changes are slow, but the newest patch is pretty damn good, and I think my best answer is that like I hope so, because I do love the game. I've always been passionate about it, and yeah, but we just gotta try our best to keep farming those jobs and keep pushing those numbers so people see it. So yeah.
So we'll end the podcast there. We're right at the top of the hour. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you, Jonas, for joining us as well, especially considering all the travel and the crazy schedule you've had the past weekend. Thanks for watching Visionaries on YouTube. For more content, please subscribe to the Overcome channel.